So that Saturday, she took him to the store to get his ingredients, and then he got to work. She supervised here and there, but he insisted that she didn't need to, so eventually, she came to the living room and sat with my daughter and me looking a little bit dejected. I reassured her that I was sure he'd still want to cook with her, he just wanted to try it out on his own. That seemed to help a little, but she still seemed a little off. When he finished and we all sat down to eat, I was honestly surprised at just how well he managed to do on his own. I feel bad saying it, but even after a year or so of cooking with his mother, I expected him to mess up more than he did. I wanted to encourage this interest of his, so I made sure to let him know while I was eating how good he did and gently brought up the few mistakes he had made. I did it a lot more than I usually would with my wife's cooking, and in hindsight, I can see that that's what started all of this. His sister, being his little sister, was not as supportive as I was and quite rudely insulted his cooking. I was going to tell her to mind her manners and be thankful that he cooked for us when my wife made a sound and pushed her plate away, before agreeing and saying that it was too salty and overcooked. This took me aback, and I could tell my son took it hard too, as his mood visibly dropped. I didn't say anything at the time, since my wife and I never argue in front of the kids. I just kept up the praise of my son's cooking as his mother picked at the plate for a little while longer before she took her and our daughter's plates to the kitchen. A little while later, I went to check on my son, and I could tell that he had been crying. So I comforted him, told him I was sure his mother loved the food, and that she was probably just having a bad day, not to take it personally. Then later, once the kids were asleep, I confronted her about it. She tried to brush it off, but I pushed, and she got mad and said that I complimented his cooking far more than I ever complimented hers. This caught me off guard since I didn't expect my wife to be jealous of our son, and I unfortunately let out an involuntary scoff at this. She blew up at me for laughing, and we ended up arguing for a while. Eventually, I managed to explain that I was complimenting him so much because I wanted to encourage him to keep cooking. She even admitted that she shouldn't have been so harsh about it. She said she would apologize to him, and I figured that everything was settled. That Monday, when I was driving my son to school, I noticed he wasn't acting normal and was looking out the window, trying to hide his face from me. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me he was fine, but I could tell he was fighting back tears. So, I asked him again, and he broke down and told me that after I had left to get the car started, she told him that she was going to be cooking alone again from now on. I was furious about this but kept my cool and told him I would talk to her about it. I bought him a snack from the store before dropping him off at school. I left work early so I could get home before the kids and talk to my wife. I'll admit I didn't handle it as well as I could have, and we ended up in a shouting match where I called her childish for being so vindictive towards our son because she was upset with me. She called him a baby and said he shouldn't be so sad about not being allowed to cook since it wasn't a man's job to do so anyway. We ended up leaving each other alone to cool down. When our kids got home, my wife took our daughter out and came back later with a load of toys and clothes for her. I knew immediately what she was trying to do, and that night I told her that I would not let her use the money I make for our family to punish our son. She didn't take this well, and we ended up arguing again. I slept in the guest room and have been there up to this point. For this past month, my wife has kept up this vindictive showering of our daughter with attention and gifts while almost entirely ignoring our son. I've been talking to my parents and brother about this, and while they agree that she's wrong, they also don't see it as that big of a problem and think it'll sort itself out. At this point, with how she's been treating our son, I'm starting to fall out of love with her, but I also don't want to jump to divorce if there's something I can do to fix this whole situation. I can honestly say that we've never had a fight this big. Sure, we bicker every now and then, but she's never taken that out on our son in the past. I feel responsible and guilty about what happened, and I've been trying to do nice things for my son when I can. But I also don't want to mirror my wife's behavior, so I've also been taking my daughter with us about half the time we go places. However, whenever we do, she's been very rude and always talks about all the stuff her mother does for her lately because she knows it bothers her brother. Seeing the way my wife has been treating our son has made me second guess our marriage, but I don't want to jump straight to divorce either. Any advice on what I should do, or how to best bring up the topic of therapy, would be appreciated. Update 1. Thank you for all of the support, even the comments that got a bit nasty. That kind of pushback helped me see that things were a lot worse than I realized. Some of you could do with being a bit nicer, but the advice is appreciated all the same. The first thing I did after making my previous post was take my son to my parents' house to tell them what was happening from his perspective. I figured they might be more receptive to seeing the pain their grandson was going through and not just write it off like they had with me. They ended up understanding and were supportive of my next move, which was kicking my wife out until she worked through whatever problem she was going through. Next, I consulted with a lawyer. He told me it would be best to have the papers ready to go, even if I wasn't sure I wanted the divorce yet, because it's better to get it done as quickly as possible if I decide to go through with it. In Canada, you have to either separate for a year or prove abuse or adultery. I took the kids to my folks' house the next Saturday and came back with my mother. I let her talk with my wife first, and then, when they were done, I told my wife that I needed her to leave the house until she sorted out whatever was causing her to act this way toward our son. She, surprisingly, agreed to this. I'm guessing hearing things from my mother knocked some sense into her, as they were always quite close. I told her that my parents were willing to let her stay there during the time because her parents lived too far away, or I could put her up in a nearby motel. I would also pay for her to see a therapist every week, which I told her was mandatory for fixing things. Our kids spent the night with my parents, and we moved her out the next day. We both sat with the kids and told them what was happening. Our son understood, but our daughter didn't and was quite upset. Eventually, we calmed her down. Things went well for the first month or so. She went to all of the weekly appointments, and I met her for dinner a few nights a week with the kids, and she seemed to be treating our son properly again. I was really hopeful that she had been making progress. Then, the Friday after her 5th therapy appointment, she sent me a wall of text messages about how I was a jerk, how I was trying to steal her children from her, and how I was probably smashing someone on the side. I tried calling her to see what she was talking about, but I think she shut her phone off. I called my mother, and she told me that my wife had left the house earlier that day with all of her stuff without saying anything to my mom. I'm not 100% sure what happened next since my wife refuses to tell me most details, and I can't get in contact with the friends she was with. The best I can piece together is that she told her best friend about what was happening, and that friend started telling her all about how I was just trying to kick her out and steal her kids. She then moved in with her friend and went on a week-long bender of clubbing, drinking, and illicit substances. When we were younger, we did our fair share of stupid crap together, so while this was surprising, it was most likely her dumb friends convincing her to relive the good old days. I hadn't heard anything for about a week, then I got a text from her friend, telling me I was a loser, that my wife was too good for me, and that she was smashing a younger guy. I tried to demand she give my wife the phone so I could talk with her, but I never got a reply. I screenshotted the text for evidence if I needed it. I ended up getting a call from the hospital at around 3 in the morning that Sunday. My wife had overdosed on something and was dropped off at the ER by someone who didn't stick around. Since I was her emergency contact, they reached out to me. I called my mom to come watch the kids and headed over there. They managed to stabilize her and were treating her. I stuck around for a few hours, and she was in and out of consciousness. When she was conscious, she wasn't very talkative. When she properly woke up, she started apologizing for everything, and that's when I found out the few details I know about her friend and the bender. I asked her if she had been sleeping with someone else, as her friend had claimed, and she didn't reply, which was as much of an answer as I needed. She kept trying to apologize, and I just kept my cool and told her this wasn't the time or place for this. We ended up leaving at about 8 a.m. the next day. I got her back to my parents' place, got her into bed, and just before I left, I put the papers on the table beside the bed and told her that I expected her to sign them within a week and that I had proof she cheated on me during her bender. I had told my parents I was planning on doing this on the phone, so I wasn't just dumping this drama on them without warning. The kids are both doing fine. They don't know anything of what happened with their mother or the divorce. All they know is that my wife is still moved out, and that she's busy getting better, so we're not going to be seeing her as much. I'll probably tell them in a couple of weeks, whenever school lets out for the summer, so it doesn't affect their learning. Over the next couple of weeks, I've gotten countless calls from her, ranging from begging for a second chance to screaming at me that she hated me and was going to make my life hell, going back and forth every other day. I've also been getting vitriolic texts from her family and friends calling me all sorts of names and threatening that if I don't drop the divorce, I'll regret it. All of these have been screenshotted. My parents agree that divorce is for the best, but they're questioning my timing and wondering if I shouldn't have picked a better time to do this than when she was fresh out of the hospital. I'm 100% sure I want her out of my life, and I plan on going for full custody of my children as I don't want them around my wife if this behavior is what she's willing to stoop to. And while I do want it done as soon as possible, I'm wondering if I should take back the papers and tell her I've changed my mind, at least until she's a bit more stable.